He's the principal consultant of Waugh Partners. And I want to thank and acknowledge his inspiration for the title of today's forum, The Foundations of Open, because it was through a conversation with both Jeff and Pia Waugh that this really developed into what it developed into. So you're an entirely appropriate person to take up this next important slot in our program today. And as a person and as a professional contributor, you inspire a huge number of people in Australia with your work advocating for open source and the technical work that you do. So thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. Please welcome Jeff Waugh.
Good morning, freedom lovers. Those of you who are more regular audience members of my talks will recognise the intro. I'm going to start with something a little bit different, a little bit of history for you. So, 3-minute grab of history.
Sure, at one level we all understand computers, don't we? They send us bills and statements. And even this awe-inspiring lot here, the British Airways computer, one of the biggest and fastest in the world, will do some very endearing things for you. I mean, you can book your old granny onto any flight from anywhere to anywhere with all the trimmings like this. That's her and her flights and hotels. And this is her and her personal details. Look, she speaks only Italian, she's flying for the first time, she doesn't like carrots, she wants help when she gets there, she wants to sit near the toilet and not see the film, she's got excess baggage and a lot more. And this friendly monster will do that for you for a flight anytime up to a year in the future and prepare your bill within 50th of a second. Great. That's the kind of assistance computers give us that help the world go round. And you get involved. You pay. But that's not the side of the computer I'm talking about. If part one of the specialization of knowledge happened in the 15th century when Johann Gutenberg came up with the printing press and helped scientists to talk their own kind of gibberish to each other on the printed page, easier than they'd ever done it before, then this is part two. Only this is no book that you can leaf through and get a rough idea what it's talking about. This is the future. Because if you tell a computer everything you know about something, it will juggle the mix and come up with a prediction. Do this and you'll get that. And if you have information and a computer, you too can look into the future. And that is power. Commercial power, political power, power to change things. You want some of that power? Easy. Go get yourself a PhD. Otherwise, the way things have become, forget it. And there's no point in coming in here and saying, show me, look. So what? Me too. But never mind the machinery. What about the stuff this lot uses? The raw material that will change our futures like you would never believe. Information, not the facts. It's too late for that. What you do with the facts. Because there, you're into probability theory, choosing one of the alternate futures and actually making it happen. And how does the man in the street get involved in that game? He doesn't. So when the next major change comes out of the computers, double-checked and pre-packaged, it looks increasingly like you've only got two options open to you. One, do nothing. Stick your thumb in your mouth and switch your mind to neutral. Two, do what people have done for centuries when machines did things they didn't want. Overreact, strike out, sabotage the machine for good. You want that?
So does anyone know who this dude is? James Burke. So I've watched his series, Connections, An Alternative View of Change, after about 5 years of people saying, hey, you'd really like this TV series, Connections. You should totally watch it. You really get into it. And never really got around to it until actually just a couple months ago. And I watched through the whole series, and I'm sorry, I've kind of given you kind of the end of the series here. This is sort of the punchline at the end of the whole series, but you'll absolutely love the entire series. It's incredible. I'm sitting there on the couch, and this part of the episode comes up, and Pia's on the phone, trying to do some work and stuff like that, and I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, and he starts talking about this, and I'm leaping up and down, Tom Cruise style on the couch going, oh my God! course, he was on national TV, so he kind of did. But I rarely talk about my age in public settings, but amongst this esteemed group and the internet, he did in fact utter these words before I was born. And so I was just shocked that his prescient point of view on what was going to be the problem for us in the future. And when he says information, it just rings to me like information retrieval from Brazil. And so it's just incredible to listen to this. And that forms some of the background of why Pierre and I do what we do. Actually, hold on, I'll just get this out. This is why I strap in for your safety. That's why we know. There's no point doing a talk about technology without actually using it. So some of that background is why Pierre and I put together the Foundations of Open. And I'm blushing here because the event has been named after this, so I feel some great sense of responsibility to deliver on that. So this is Pierre and I, and we help companies do open source and help the industry and community grow and rock. But mostly what we care about is flipping the switch to freedom. That's what we care about. There's an industry and community perspective that's part of our conspiratorial actions towards flipping the switch to freedom. And an important point, freedom is not just for geeks. I think amongst this room, there's a certain amount of geek in everyone here. And so we understand the elements of freedom that are involved in open access, open technologies, open source. But the wider world doesn't understand it. Now, if you indulge me for a moment, I'm going to get a little bit parenthetical this early in the talk. I apologize. But one of the projects that I work on is a project called GNOME. It is the desktop that you'll find on most Linux distributions. Very, very sexy, very easy to use. And in fact, freedom is not just for geeks is one of the mottos of the GNOME project. And it's a really important point in our history, in the GNOME project's history. And it created such cultural change amongst the GNOME developers. This is a relic of GNOME history. It is the global panel properties dialog box. If you think about, in Mac OS X, you've got the dock down the bottom and the menu up the top, or in Windows, you've got the start bar. This is the bunch of settings that we had for the equivalent functionality in GNOME. And you'll find things here such as the hide delay. When you want your panel to hide, you could set it to the millisecond, just in case you wanted to. Here we have the tiles that appear when you put your mouse over one of the launchers on the panel. Rather than just sort of highlighting the launcher in a nice way, we allowed you to put a bitmap of any kind. So you can put a picture of your mum. When you roll over any of your programs, you could see a picture of your mum if you wanted to. Really, really crucial stuff here. We've got this setting here that we like to describe as an unbreak me option. Basically, what this option does is make things work like they're supposed to. So you've got broken or not broken. And this one makes all of the buttons flush with the edge of the screen. So when you swing your mouse down to the edge of the screen, you can click the icon without having extra pixels to click through. This one caused particular problems with translators. We would always get them asking questions like, in what sense do you mean the word flush? This one's great. This is, and excuse my French, but this is what we call the combinatorial brain fuckage option. Not only can you set the buttons to be aligned with the panel edge, but you can also set it and the number of pixels away from the panel edge if you really want to break it. So we provide that level of ability to break your machine. This one's great. Lots and lots of crazy stuff here. My favorite one here is automatically recheck menus for newly installed software, because when you install software, you don't want it to appear in your menu. Again, another breaking option. This one is what we call exposing mechanics, exposing the mechanics of the underlying software in the computer to the user, which we regard as punching a user in the face. We try to give these kinds of emotive kind of phrases so that we create this cultural change amongst our developers. This one's great, the miscellaneous tab. Don't know what to call it, and in addition to the miscellaneous tab, we have a miscellaneous frame. no idea what all of this crap is. We'll just call it miscellaneous. In modern GNOME systems, what you'd be using if you installed Ubuntu today, it's all gone. None of this is a feature. None of this is actually value to the user. So we've got rid of it. We've made it just work. I'll give you a moment to read this one. That is a very good question. Essentially, what this is saying is you have a pistol with two chambers and two bullets. Let's play Russian roulette. This is an example of a GNOME dialog box. What we've done in recent GNOME versions, we've used a feature of written and spoken language that we like to call verbs. And we put those verbs right on the buttons. So you know that experience where you're standing behind your mom or a member of your family and a dialog box pops up on the screen and they just click and you're This is designed to avoid that. Now, I'm wearing a pair of contact lenses today that are a particular brand of new technology that we have in the GNOME project. Trade secret, patent pending, can't give it out to the members of the general public. You never know who's going to be in the crowd. And the point behind the contact lenses is to see the computer as a normal everyday user sees it. The kind of user who doesn't name their computer a funny name or go to bed with their computer, those kinds of people. So I'm sorry that you can't see any of that. But if you can imagine that the text in the dialog box is obscured somehow, that's essentially what a user sees when a dialog box pops up on screen. And you can see here, it's yes or no. And here is what it looks like in GNOME. Thankfully, you have these verbs here that give you a fairly good idea of what's going on when you see it. This is actually very similar to a thing that happens in my house all the time. I ask Pia whether she wants a tea or coffee, and she gives me a yes, no, cancel answer. I'm actually looking for is tea, coffee, no thanks. And that is the end of my parenthetical journey at this part of the talk. So where was I? Yes, freedom is not just for geeks. But freedom is hard. Software freedom is particularly hard. On Software Freedom Day, an event in September, Pia is the president of Software Freedom International, so we like to talk about it a lot. I had the experience of walking past someone in the city and saying, would you like to hear about free software? And I'm thinking, that's embarrassing and difficult and hard, but they said, oh, free software, it can't be any good, can it? Okay, lost that one. So after a while I decided, I don't like this phrase free software so much. We have this whole free libra problem in English. So the phrase that I like to use more often these days is software freedom. So I said to someone else, would you like to hear about software freedom? They said, freedom from software? That sounds awesome! Not quite my point. But so freedom is a very abstract thing, and it even becomes more abstract. Thank you very much. It becomes even more abstract when you're talking about software freedom because people don't understand what we understand about software. They don't understand the code behind it. They don't understand the processes. Rarely do they understand that the human actually made this stuff. Usually it's the computer attacking them every day rather than the person who wrote what was on the computer attacking them every day. So what is the key to mass adoption of freedom? Some people have said, killer apps. We have to have killer apps. Open source killer apps. That'll get everyone using free software. That'll be great. So this is what I like to refer to as the exporting democracy approach. Some people have got the reference already. But I don't think this is the way, because basically, people say the iPod was a killer app. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that the iPod itself was a killer app. The world doesn't work like that anymore. What the iPod had going for it was this. iTunes 7 download now. A free music player that you could grab that connected to the iPod if you had one, but if you didn't have it, you could still have a really cool music player. And then, scroll down the page, the iTunes Music Store. They all work together to keep you within that beautiful set of features that Apple provides. The hard hearts and minds approach, network effects. The more people you have using your platform, the more devices using your platform, the better it is. And of course the platform strategy, be under everything, be inside everything. Those of you watching devices that have Linux installed on them, the ones that you don't know about in your home, such as if you have an HD TV, it's very likely that there's Linux installed. Be everywhere, seeping through the cracks. But we do that in the open source community. Who knows what LAMP is?
Linux, Apache, MySQL, Perl, Python, Marlin.
You are absolutely incorrect. LAMP is Linux, Apache, most of our cool scripting languages start with P, and PostgreSQL. Are there any Sun employees here today? Of course, for the traditionalist, yes, okay, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And all of these have worked together so well. Linux, brilliant, stable, robust, cheap infrastructure. Apache, fantastic web server. Depending on your interest at the level of the stack, whether you want to build applications, whether you want to provide services to people who want to build applications, all of these integrate really beautifully and they build out those network effects and a great platform strategy. So we have these, but the platform of software freedom and open source is much deeper than that. It's more than just the source code. And that's where the foundations of open come in, because it is not just the source code that is underlying all of the success that we've had in the open source and free software community. So the first part of the foundations of open is open licenses. And of course we have way too many licenses, which is a problem. But 70% of projects use the GPL anyway. GPL is good. GPL is a supreme hack on copyright. It uses copyright against itself, which is wonderful. We don't have something similar for patents yet. Patents are much harder. We actually need someone who is smarter than Richard Stallman to figure out how to attack patents with themselves, and that's going to take a while. That's why we need to flip the switch to freedom. We need to get people thinking about all of these issues so that they come up with those ideas. There's your network effect, 70% using GPL. Great software ecosystem that works together. But of course, it's not just software. We like to use the technical term stuff. Open licensing of stuff. It may not be source code, it might be other things. So there's a renewed interest in the public domain, both the historical public domain and also using the public domain as a tool. And then of course there's also the Creative Commons, which Jessica will be speaking about later today. Then we have open standards as one of the parts of the foundations of open. If you think about the open standard TCP/IP, once upon a time we had disparate networks, all kinds of different kinds of networks, and TCP/IP won and bound them all, and now we have the internetwork, sometimes referred to as the internets by geeks. And of course that led to the e-commerce revolution on the internet and an enormous array of things that we built on top of the internet, and now we're depending on that so much more than we could have imagined when we had Banyan Vines and Token Ring and all of these crazy kinds of things. Great platform strategy, TCP/IP works really nicely. And of course we have IPv6, which Tony's going to be talking about later today. IPv6 means that everybody gets to be a node. No one has to be a fake node, a hidden node. Then we have open knowledge. There's no point having stuff if you don't grok it. Grok means knowledge, understanding. This is what patents were meant to do. The whole idea of patents was meant to expose the knowledge and provide a monopoly, but patents have been reworked in such a way that you can write something that means absolutely nothing, even to practitioners in the field in which you're writing it. And even then you can't read it because you're going to get stung by triple damages if you actually do anything with it later on. So we've really screwed the pooch with patents, which we've talked about earlier today. And of course, open knowledge can use all of the properties of the foundations of open itself. It's like a Russian doll. You can have openly licensed open knowledge. One of the obvious open knowledge projects that everyone will know about, I find it extraordinarily concerning that strange people who are unknown to me update this page. It's really weird. It feels like there's like a global network of stalkers. And another open knowledge project, this is what you replace books with in the third world to teach kids. Now, it does a whole bunch of other stuff as well, but the objective was to get to a price point for the one laptop per child to replace books for kids. While it's been, we have one, and actually we have a whole phalanx of them in bags over there, so we can pass those around later. But it was developed with all of the restrictions and requirements that you need for making us succeed in the developing world. As everyone knows, great inventions come from restrictions, not dreams. And this is appropriate for kids in every country, first world, third world, wherever. Case, also part of the open knowledge world, and Darryl will be speaking about that later today. Then we have open governance, which was referred to quite a lot earlier this morning. The structure and the way that people contribute to projects is really important. Who knows what this acronym is? Benevolent Dictator for Life. And here is one. I probably should have warned about nudity at the beginning of this talk. This is Linus Torvalds and Speedos at LinuxConf AU. And I'm trying to summon up as much cultural cringe as I possibly can so that this doesn't sound so bad. But we have the best technical open source and free software conference in the world. And Linus comes back year after year, even after we dunked him in 2004, which was so much fun. But anyway. But who owns that governance? Who runs that governance model? In the case of the Linux kernel with Linus, Linus essentially runs that governance model, but there are other projects where companies run the governance model, and it's harder to get involved in those sometimes. So the structure and the way that governance models are led is really important. Agile versus bureaucratic governance models, I think, is a really important issue. For instance, in the GNOME project, we have a very meritocratic and social governance model, whereas you look at something like the Apache project, that has a very bureaucratic governance model. Membership in the Apache Foundation is part of being an Apache maintainer. It's a different way of looking at things. What about democracy? Is democracy agile or bureaucratic? 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 We prefer meritocracy and consensus in the open source world. That actually gets things done faster than democracy. But we have some active democracy going on here today, voting with Votopedia. I'm glad I didn't bring my mobile phone up. I'd be voting now. And then finally, open market. Now, this is not one that Pia and I included at the very beginning of doing the foundations of open. But one of the things that we believe very strongly about is fierce commerce, fierce freedom. These things work together really, really well. There was a comment on Tuesday at an event that Pierre and I ran about urban Chardonnay Marxist chic and the open source community being Marxist and so on. And I really don't think that that's the perspective that most people have in the open source community these days. Commerce and freedom are actually working together extraordinarily well to boost each other. Can you or I join a market in the open source world? Are you able to participate in the market and in the governance model of the market as well? If you thought lock-in was bad, lock-out is even worse. DRM. So public good and market good, can they work together? Pia's going to be talking a little bit about that later today. An important quote from Tridge over in Conway with his dog. The other quote of Tridge's that is a favourite of mine is that he thinks much of the progress of open source is on the backs of procrastinating students, which I think is entirely true. But anyway, so then how do we apply the foundations? Well, Pia, who's groaning in the background at me using this photo, I love this photo so much, but Pia is extraordinarily good at packing the car. I stand there looking goofy saying that's never going to work, and Pia packs it really, really well. So Pia likes measuring things, and she likes using the foundations of open as measurement tools. Me, I like things in shades of grey. I also like photos that are slightly more flattering to my butt. And so I try to stray away from the measurement aspects and look at the shades of grey and the interactions between all of the different foundations of open, because it's in the interactions that things get really interesting. So what about the interaction between governance and licenses? Well, refer back to my trolling about LAMP earlier. There's a really fascinating case with PostgreSQL and MySQL. MySQL is a GPL licensed project which you'd think would make it massively adopted, lots and lots of contributors. PostgreSQL has a BSD license, which means that people can go and take PostgreSQL and create proprietary products from it. So you'd think that there'd be less of a community there. But the strange thing is that you combine the market forces involved. MySQL is owned by one company, and they very rarely take contributions from anyone else, despite the fact that it's an open source project. In fact, at the MySQL conference last year, Google did a press release the day before and said, we have a whole bunch of really fantastic patches that we think MySQL will absolutely love. And then the entire conference, people were asking their MySQL stuff, so when are you going to take those Google patches? So that was a really nice hack on Google's part. Governance and market, combination of those two. Red Hat, Debian, and Ubuntu. I'm sure many of you have heard about the Ubuntu project. Ubuntu is kind of a fork of Debian in a way. Basically what they did is they took all of the really great things about Debian and then added a sane governance model on top. That's essentially all they did. They have originally they had about 15 staff actually working on the technology itself and doing the integration. Very few people involved, whereas Debian has about 1,000 developers. Also, basically they built the community on top of it. And Debian has this really odd, strange kind of political community, lots of flame wars, those sorts of things. And Ubuntu had a really great place to work. They had a code of conduct and all these sorts of things, so they were very, very welcoming to people. At the same time, Red Hat took their product and they made it a subscription-based product. And so they had to introduce a new product called Fedora to allow the community to participate in the Red Hat ecosystem. Licenses and standards. One of the really fascinating things that's happening in the industry at the moment is this idea of patent covenants and promises, with the idea of bringing technologies to market to be adopted by lots and lots of companies, lots of communities, even though they're covered by patents. So this is this idea of trying different ways of using patents against themselves. So there's actually going to be a symposium about this at the Cyberspace Law Centre at the University of New South Wales in a few weeks' time. So we'll be talking about things like the open specification promise from Microsoft and similar things from IBM and Sun, and seeing if there's actually a combined sort of agreement between industry and community on what we can do to make it so that technologies that are covered by patents can be used by the community and industry. Then we have knowledge and licenses. I don't quite understand this, but what is the academic aversion to commercial use? It seems that so many things through the academic world are non-commercially licensed, which is kind of frustrating. Market knowledge. Who knows what this is?
Oh, that's where I work.
This is the center of the universe. Everything goes around it. In the USA, mapping tool on there. You find your way from the airport to the hotel, straight away at the hotel, and we have very little of that here now. In fact, what's happening now is we've got two great big companies that are basically running the show here. You've got Census and Google, and everyone's using their service, and we're not building local kind of businesses around all of this. Spatial potential. Alan is going to be talking about that later this afternoon. On Tuesday, Pierre and I launched the Open Source Industry and Community Report, and hopefully that will have some answers to some of the concerns that Anne will be talking about later this afternoon. And then finally, standards and market. Anyone who's been watching the news, who's been involved in this at all, will know that there is a very interesting combination of things going on in the standards world and the market world. There is essentially the biggest industry war being played out in a venue that cannot handle this kind of warfare, the International Standards Organization. And the answer came back as something that many in the open source community aren't particularly happy with. But on both sides of this debate, it's been a massive fight over standards, and the process hasn't been designed to come under that kind of attack. So this leads directly back into our friend James Burke, who's talking about the control of information and how that is the crucial issue that we face and he was talking about it 30 years ago. So that's kind of an introduction to our foundations of open research, with little tidbits about what's going on throughout the day, and what I'd say to all of you in this room, all of you are thought leaders, all of you come from all around the country and have an impact on what people understand about openness and think about openness, and I would ask you to be the signal and get that message out there so that the rest of the folks in our community who don't understand the subtleties of this can find out about it. Thank you very much.
I'm going to keep this casual and stay here. Anyone want to throw something up in the air following Jeff's presentation? I'll start, seeing I'm talking. Jeff, the concept of the foundations of open, one of the things that appealed to me the most was that you were getting the concept out of that IT sort of geeky universe and interpreting it for other spheres. And for me, how public policy interacts with those range of other spheres is what I'm really interested in. What motivated you to get to that point, and how do you think this message of the broad foundations of openness can be pushed out into those different spheres? I mean, whether we like it or not, we're still operating in silos to a fair degree. But what are your strategies for pushing it out into those different areas and getting those different spheres or sectors to start talking this kind of language?
So it was sort of partly on our minds when we put this together that it could be applied beyond open source and ICT in general. But we didn't think about it a heck of a lot. It's actually been after we came up with that structure that we started applying it to all kinds of different issues. And Pia's done a research project with Oswatch in the UK that she's going to talk about during her talk. Are you going to talk about that? Rock and roll. Yes.
She is now.
Yeah, well, I've signed you up. So that's one attempt, and what we wanted to try and do is take these ideas and see which researchers are going to be interested in applying them to their own sphere.
Jeff mentioned the mapping data as a good example, and I think this comes back to public policy for access to knowledge and open data. We actually have more access to American knowledge than we do to our own, because public, within the American public funded stuff, is publicly accessible, whereas, well, our knowledge is locked up in copyright and we have to get rights to get permission, and we just can't, or we just steal it. So I think that's really quite critical to the future of open.
Can we hack freedom of information and do something about that?
Can I say just
Consensus is what you were looking for, and that's playing into that. But my immediate thought was consensus. Where do you ever find consensus for? And that's how things end up becoming good. Is because it's great to have an active community, but how the hell do you ever reach a decision using an active community? Because everybody's going to have their own opinion. And that's part of the issue, as you mentioned, license proliferation, like there are too many licenses, all this kind of thing. You're never going to have the same opinions from everybody, and it becomes quite hard to create standards and whatnot on this basis without some kind of benevolent dictatorship.
Half-naked ones at that.
Yeah.
Can I? Sorry, I don't want to. Okay. Neil Hooper, I'm from Queensland and Queensland Treasury. The very issues that we're talking, I think, I'm happy to open up the discussion because I read your keynote speech and I thought this is exactly what my project is working on with the Queensland government. And this is not an open source project. This is about information management and making government information available online. And I look at this standards. This is an initiative which has to have global application. It needs standards. We need standards about things called metadata, like the little tags you put on the data, if it's going to work internationally. Because we want to go to interoperability. We want to enhance connectivity across the globe. We are really working towards Source code, I won't touch on that because it's not my area, but the market, yes, because government has to work with the private sector. We have representatives here talking about mapping information. We've got representatives here today from ACEBA. They're a key business unit or firm in this whole mapping area of data and government information. We were talking before about how copyright can be used to tie up mapping information. Might be pleased to know that our whole reason is to use copyright to make it active, just as the Creative Commons licenses are doing, so that we can get that information out there, use copyright as an attribution process, but get the information out there on basically a free use basis for people to be able to utilise it. I couldn't agree more, and this is what our project is fundamentally about. Taxpayers have paid for this data already. There's a movement in the US, you may already be in the UK, about 3R data. You might think the Guardian's running that. We're fully cognizant of what's going on there. So the taxpayers have already paid for this information. Government has got important issues about freedom of information, privacy, confidentiality. Those things have to be respected. But there's a vast majority of public sector information which is paid for by the taxpayers, which can be made available. And that's what our project is
Neil,
about.
we're going to be having a chance to talk about that directly with the senior presentation this
Okay,
afternoon. So I might just
I'm not aware of
grab
that.
you up
Okay.
there and type them in just come on down the website.
But I just want to say, those common themes are right there. You know, I couldn't agree with it more. It goes right across the spectrum. That's not just over the schools. And you've got it, yeah, I know you realise it.
Have we have a collection of sort of computer people with an academic background with a naive idea of how the world works, trying to remake the world? I'm playing devil's advocate here. For example, with the OXML Microsoft standards proposals, I'm on the Council of Standards Australia for the Australian Computer Society, and a whole lot of open source people said we can't have a standard that's got a patent in it. How do we get involved in this? Where is the open forum? And I felt like saying, well, this is a Standards Australia process. You can have patents on standards. Standards are not developed by the open community. They're developed by people on standards committees and people who are members of the standards body. And it has rules and processes and things. These aren't the rules and processes and things that you're proposing. They're a different one. If you want to change the way this works, then you'll have to do a whole lot of other things. You can't just come in at the last moment and say you can't do that. So I think.
You know, is
Go and have a crack at it.
this creative naivety in a way that if we do this enough, we can change the world this way?
I think one of the interesting things about the standards process is that it's a process that's designed to say yes. It's designed to come out with a standard. What goes in will eventually come out as a standard once it's been fixed, and all those untouchables in the open source community amongst the kind of very black and white people who are not interested in building consensus and want to, flame, all sorts of people and say that Standards Australia is corrupt and all this kind of stuff. That has no place in the standards process and has no place in public discourse, and that's something that the community is going to have to work on.
Okay, Jessica, I think you want
I'm
to
thinking
start.
about your naivety point, though.
Jessica,
I was going to say very quickly, building on what Neil said, that it isn't just about, sort of making everything public domain and stuff like that. It is about having full, policies and standards that apply across the whole thing. For example, in the US, one of the problems they have is that a lot of public bodies, even as simple as, sorry, it's very disconcerting because I can see myself being filmed while I'm talking. A lot of public bodies are small down as city councils stopped putting their information out there at all because they knew the moment they did, they lost control of it. So it's all about taking all the considerations, including commercial considerations that government bodies and everybody has to take into account, and trying to build good, transparent, and as open as possible policies to get material out there. It's not just let's get rid of all the copyright, or let's just put the licenses there and everybody will use them and we'll all be happy world. It's about getting proper standards and a balanced approach.
I think.
Information management, that's what I wanted. Information management.
Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting kind of misunderstanding between the people participating in that conversation, figuring that out, because there's people on one side of the divide who look at the open source community and they go, okay, you know, this crazy rabble of people doing all this crazy stuff, uncontrollable, you know, there's no quality, there's no standards, there's no structure, it's all just mad craziness. Whereas on the open source side, we're like, well, we have really strict governance models where we're actually extraordinarily diligent, more so than proprietary software developers in many cases, particularly with the large projects that have a great infrastructure. And so I think there's actually a lot to be learned once we get past that disconnect.
Right, well, our time's going to blow out if we keep this conversation going. There were a couple of people.
I'll make a very quick one.
Yeah.
This is all about publishing. It's got to come back. Most of these organisations are almost deaf to feedback. If I believe Google, I'd be dead having to right after the Roseville Bridge on Google Maps, right, across 3 lanes of 80k traffic. Try and tell them how they're deaf. Try and tell them that Harbord in New South Wales has been renamed Freshwater. You may all go to Freshwater, Queensland. They don't know that it's changed. There are so many errors out there. There has to be an open mechanism to correct them. Whether Wikipedia is correct or not, I don't know.
Google seemed to be very effective at fixing bugs that are filed using the Sydney Morning Herald.
I'd like to comment on that real quick, seeing as I'm the Google representative. It goes back to the quality of the data. The data comes from PSMA, government agency. We are absolutely bound by that. But as I don't know if we're going to talk about user-generated content or user-generated stuff today, but that I think is the future.
You're the retailer. I'm complaining to you.
Please do. We're going to push back to those vendors.
Thanks, Alan. Kevin, and then I'm going to shut this down. We've got we'll get a chance to say a few words. I know.
Kevin Hart from MySoc AU.
I'm being loyal to my speakers.
I had a meeting yesterday with a small Australian developer that's developed their own packages for the secondary and primary school education market. Now they've used a lot of open source technology in the product that they've developed, but they have used a normal proprietary commercial model to develop their software. Half of those developers have been reasonably successful. The 2 principles of the organisation take a commercial risk. They put money up to get this going. They're commercially reasonably successful. They're afloat, which is good. But the thing is, they are fully aware of the open source model, but it's very hard to find commercial models that you can put to somebody who sees a niche in the marketplace, it's not being fulfilled, it needs to